Hello and welcome to Brand Your Passion, the show that helps you turn the thing you love the most into something that people know and love you for. I'm your host, Holly Arnett, the brand coach for creatives, and I'm on a mission to make the world a more creative place, one brand at a time. If you're ready to get more eyes on your work, more dollars in your pocket, and more creativity in your life, you're in the right place. Welcome. Let's brand your passion. And welcome back to this week's episode of Brand Your Passion. I am super excited and it is my honor this week to be joined by branding legend and creative Debbie Millman. Welcome to the show, Debbie.
Thank you, Holly. It's really, really nice to be here. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. It is obviously my massive honor to have you on the show. And I am obviously dying to hear your kind of branding expertise for the creatives who are listening to this episode. But I also am really excited to hear about your own kind of creative journey and how you have built your own personal brand. And I've done a little bit of research about you. So I want to go back a little bit to when you were kind of young and how your creativity came through, if it did, as a child. And I read that your mother was a seamstress and your father owned his own pharmacy. And I'm curious to know if you think that kind of growing up around those creative and entrepreneurial parents helped kind of draw you to a life as a creative.
Well, I think that we're all influenced by how we're brought up. And I think I was impacted both by the talent and the intelligence that my parents had, as well as the circumstances. And I think they're probably pretty equal in terms of what they were able to provide for me in terms of their drive, their ambition, their talent, but also the ways in which their own struggles and psychological issues impacted the way that I am now. So I do think all of that is super important in terms of how our personalities are shaped and how we make our way through the world.
Yeah, definitely. And so do you think that you were kind of creative as a child, as a young person? Were you creative back then?
Yeah, I was always making things. Always making things. I was putting on little shows with my brother, and I was making window decorations, and I made my own perfume from rose petals.
Wow.
I made a magazine with my best friend. Yeah, there was always something that I was doing that kept me creative.
Yeah, I love that. And from being a child, you ended up growing up and then studying English with a minor in Russian literature. How did you get to kind of that stage of your life in doing English?
Well, it really wasn't something that was well thought out.
Right.
I was really quite confused at the time about what I was capable of doing, what I was worthy of doing. And for me, it was just a easy way to think about doing something that I enjoyed. You know, I majored in English, I minored in Russian literature, but really I have a degree in reading. I wouldn't say that either was chosen very strategically in terms of what my future prospects for employment would be. You know, it was very much, this is what I enjoy doing. And so let's just formalize it as a major.
Yeah, and I think so many creatives do that, right? And going to college or university becomes sort of a time to figure those things out and realize, okay, this is what I want to do, or this isn't what I want to do.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and you, throughout that process, you were writing on the school newspaper, which is where you found design. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Everybody that worked on the paper from an editorial perspective were also, or the sort of leaders were expected to put the paper together. And
Yeah.
so I was very involved in the design by default. That was part of
Yeah.
my responsibility. So I literally learned on the job and found that I love designing the paper as much, if not more, than conceptualizing the ideas for each issue, assigning the writing and editing. Like I loved doing the design and spent a lot of time doing it and
Yeah.
really fell in love with it.
Amazing. And I'm sure a lot of other creatives experience this too, right? Where you have multi passions, you have one thing that you love and maybe you're studying that thing, but then through that process you find something else. And so what was that experience like for you, having kind of studied one creative passion? You said you love writing, but then finding something else in that process. Was it kind of exciting, or was it like, oh, I've just spent these X amount of years doing this?
Well, I think that at the time, I really have to say, looking back on those years, that I was just an embryo. I
Yeah.
was just beginning to become a person. I was so cut off from sort of my interior life. I was so um, consumed with trying to find a way into the world that made sense,
Mhm.
that it's hard for me to even remember what I might have been thinking. I
Yeah.
do have some diaries of that time, so
Oh
I have
yeah.
been back, but even the rereading the way that I constructed my life, it feels very foreign. And
Mhm.
I was really just trying to survive. I
Mhm.
didn't have any real role models. I didn't have any guidance. I didn't have any money. I
Mhm.
didn't have any connections. I was super insecure and felt very unworthy of anything great. But on the other hand, I also wanted to have a great, sort of purposeful life. I had no idea what any of that meant. So it's very hard to look back at that time and think of my living at that moment very deliberately. I was just sort of trying to make my way forward and survive.
Yeah, and just knowing that you were enjoying the process of design, so I'm just going to follow that and see where it goes.
It wasn't even following the process of design. It was, this is the only marketable skill that I have that will allow me to make money.
Yeah.
And so I leveraged that little bit of experience I had into getting my first jobs. What I didn't realize at the time is how woefully unprepared I was to actually pursue a career in design, because I had learned everything on the job working at my student newspaper and didn't have any formal training.
Yeah.
And so even when I remember going to an agency that helped place designers
Mhm.
in freelance positions at magazines and in advertising agencies and so forth. And in order to be qualified to do that from the agency, I didn't know this till I got there, but you had to take a test.
Ooh.
And it was really, looking back on it now, it was a super simple test, how many picas to an inch and so forth. But I didn't know any of these things. And
Yeah.
I was so humiliated. I got this test and I'm sitting in the waiting room and other people are filling out the test. And I knew I was going to fail, so I didn't want to take it, but I didn't know what to do. I couldn't run out crying, which is what I wanted to do. So I just said I had to go to the bathroom, and then I
Oh.
never came back.
Good tactic.
I mean, it was a really humiliating experience, because in that moment, I realized how much I didn't know that I didn't know, and was really still trying to make it just by the seat of my pants, so to speak, and
Mhm.
just kept learning and growing. And I remember being in another situation where I was freelancing, and all of the type that I was laying down, because back in the day it was paste up and layout, old school
Yeah.
wax machines. It was before designers were setting their own type. and the margins didn't line up. And I remember the woman I was working for thinking, where did you pick up your skills? Because girl, you don't know what you're doing. I'm
Oh.
paying you to do this and you're not doing it right. So, that's how I kept learning, by people telling me I wasn't doing it right and then figuring out how to do it right.
Yeah. Wow, what a kind of immersive experience to learn so much on the job. And I think it's obviously, I'm sure that wasn't a fun experience for you to keep being told that you were doing it wrong. But I think there's something to be said about, the amount of people these days who are learning themselves and teaching themselves these skills, that it is doable. It's just a different process than going to study or.
Yeah. I mean, some people get their degrees and know what they want and come out of the gate and get really interesting internships and then really interesting jobs and kind of move forward on a path that's very determined and deliberate and intentional. And that was not the case with me at all.
Mm-hmm.
I graduated, I didn't have any idea what I was doing. I was living in a tenement walk-up apartment. I was constantly learning as I was making mistakes. It took me a long time to figure out that I was good at what I was good at, which was branding. That took about 12 years.
Yeah.
And so every single step was a small one. There were very few leaps, if any. And it was a slow, methodical climb.
Yeah, wow. And you mentioned earlier that you said that you knew you kind of wanted to do something big, but you weren't sure if you were kind of ready to do that or worthy of doing that. And I read in an interview that you did say that I wanted to do something special, but frankly, I didn't have the guts to. But that kind of changed when you were about 30 and you decided, no, I'm going to change my life. So I think, a lot of creatives experience that kind of feeling inside where you have this passion and you know that you're kind of, there's something bigger out there, but maybe I'm not sure that I'm ready or I'm not sure that I can do that. What kind of changed for you when you said, no, I know I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to change my life.
Well, it wasn't, I didn't go easily into that change.
Yeah.
I nearly had a nervous breakdown in that
Wow.
realization. I mean, by
Mm.
the time I was 30, I already had a bad marriage behind me. I
Mm.
had had what I would consider now to be a decade of rejection and failure in trying
Yeah.
to find work and trying to find meaning. I mean, I've always wanted a special life. I just didn't always know how to go about creating one.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, as you kind of had that slow change and realization after or during that time, um, how did you kind of realize what you wanted or how you were going to get there, I suppose?
I'm
Or did
still
you?
learning that.
Yeah.
It changes every day, it changes all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not something that I can say is strategically organized. It's really
Yeah.
just a matter of, what do I feel brave enough to do today?
Yeah. Yeah. And most of us don't have all those things figured out, right? And that was
Right.
even at that was at 30, and there are creatives and people who are like early 20s who are freaking out about having everything sorted.
I know,
Um,
I know. It's just, please, for those that are freaking out like that. I mean, now I'm nearly 60 and it's still a process. And
mhm.
the pressure that young people put on themselves to make it, so to speak, is so damaging. And, one of the things that I've been talking about a lot lately in the interviews that I do is something that David Lee Roth, the former lead singer of Van Halen, told me in an interview. We were talking about I asked him what it felt like to be the sort of world's biggest star
Yeah.
in the early to mid 80s, because he was. I mean, Van Halen was the number one rock band in the world.
Mm.
And he said, you have to be really careful when you reach the tippy top of the tallest mountain, because it's usually cold, you're almost always alone, and there's only one direction.
Yeah.
And it really moved me, because one thing I can say has been a fairly consistent journey for me is wanting to still be cognizant that my best work is in front of me as opposed to behind me.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I tell my students when they're thinking about, making it when you're in your 20s, like big time making it, is, well, do you really think you're going to be able to sustain that and evolve and grow that for the 40 years following your 20s?
Yeah.
That's a hard thing to do. So my feeling is, take small steps up the mountain and hope that you reach the mountain top the day before you die.
Yeah. Wow. That is, yeah, I'm so glad that he passed on that story to you so that you could pass it on to us, because yeah, it's I mean, I'm only 26, and I think about that sometimes. I'm like, what if I achieve everything I want to achieve now, and then what? What am I going to do? What am I going to have to look forward to? So
Holly, I don't even think people really become like fully conscious of who they are until they're 30.
yeah.
Talking about this, I've been talking about this a lot because I'm about to be 60. And
Mhm.
the first 30 years of my life, 0 to 30, were just sort of practice version of being a human,
Yeah.
figuring it out. What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to have a consciousness? What does it mean to have desires and goals and ambition and talent and pain and heartbreak? And then I would say the second 30 to 60 have really been about creating this life, creating
Mm.
this journey. And finally, now, as I am, well into middle age, beginning to feel like I know who I am.
Yeah.
And I'm in a position where I'm looking at my family history. My mother is well into her 80s. My grandmother lived into her early 90s. Her sister lived into her early 90s. So there's a lot of longevity. So I'm hoping that I follow in suit and live till I'm in my early 90s, which means I have another 30 years. And
Yeah.
so 2/3 of the way through. And now I'm thinking about, well, how do I want to really spend my time? How do I want to only do things that really matter to me?
Yeah.
And now is when I think, okay, the shit has hit the fan. I have now got to decide what is worthy of my energy. And if not now, when, and so forth. So give yourself a break.
Yeah.
26, you're still in that embryonic stage. And really, if for anybody that's in their 20s, be gentle with yourself. Give yourself opportunities to fail without shame, because that's the only way you're going to be able to experiment with the possibilities of your life. If you only do things that you're going to be successful at, or that you're going to be able to master easily, then you're not striving for enough.
Yeah. I think that's such a good kind of relieves a lot of the pressure, I think, of, those of us who are kind of earlier in our lives and our careers. Um, because when you think about it, those like 10 years in our 20s, like you say, is just like one tiny sliver of the whole rest of our lives. So we don't, I guess, have to put all that pressure on getting it perfect right now. Yeah. And you said that when you were in your 20s, you experienced kind of a lot of rejection or kind of quote unquote failure throughout that stage of your career. And I remember when you spoke at Webstock, which is where I first met you and first heard of you, your talk was about on rejection and how those kind of worst moments of your life can turn out to be the best moments. And you spoke about how you had been sent a blog post that was, someone was trash talking you essentially, talking about your work and your career in a really kind of not nice light. But instead of kind of letting that stop you, you joined that conversation, and it led to so many kind of great things in your life. And, as creatives, especially as women, we are often kind of doubted, or people kind of mansplain us, or we get told off for kind of sharing our experience confidently. So it can be a little bit like crushing when somebody does sort of come back at you. So how did that sort of feel for you in the moment, if you remember? And then was it kind of like immediately you were ready to dive in and join that conversation, or was it hard at first and then you were like, I'm gonna dive in?
Probably everything is hard for me at first. I'm not a person that goes into any new experience with optimism and joy.
Yeah.
I'm very tentative about doing anything that I don't know how to do. I tend to be very resistant to change. I don't
Mhm.
like to be in a position where I'm not in control of things, although that's a bit of a sort of self deluding concept, because what am I ever in control of?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was a super, super difficult time for me, very much a struggle.
Mhm.
I struggled through trying to understand how to authentically contribute to a conversation that was about sort of decimating my entire career to that point.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it was an experience that, while at the time felt completely demoralizing and shameful and humiliating, ultimately did become the catalyst for almost every important thing that came after. And
Yeah.
so you don't really know what the purpose of something is until you experience it and really go through the entire experience. You know, there are moments in my life where I was so consumed by heartbreak, I didn't think I would be able to survive it.
Yeah.
And, you know, whether it be relationships ending, this terrible experience back in 2003, discovering this sort of vitriol
Mhm.
about me, those felt insurmountable.
Yeah.
Now I look back on them and I think, oh my God, if that relationship hadn't ended, I wouldn't have found my true love. Or
Yeah.
if that experience hadn't happened, you know, if I hadn't gotten fired from that job, or if I hadn't, whatever, the
Mhm.
things that I have now would likely not be in the state that they are. But you don't know that until you're through it.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm not a particularly religious person, but I think I'm more on the spiritual side. And while I don't think that everything that happens has a purpose and a meaning, I do think that everything that happens leads us to the next thing that happens. And we don't know what that will be. And
Yeah.
so, um, you know, I think if anything, I'm proof that many, many bad things can happen to you, but you can still emerge on the other side
Yeah.
intact and stronger.
Yeah, amazing. And I think it's so um such a testament to you that even though it was so hard and awful to read those things about you, that um you still joined that conversation. I mean, it must have been, you could have just ignored it, but then that's hard too, to not say anything. Yeah, so what made you decide, no, I have to say something, and I'm going to join, I'm going to do what I can to turn this around?
You know, at the time, I was president of a branding consultancy that I had spent, you know, a good number of years building. And I
Yeah.
was really worried that my staff or my partners would see this post on this website, Speak Up. And I wanted to ultimately, because it took me a while to decide, I think it took me about
Yeah.
3 weeks to decide to join in. But I was being called a corporate clown. I was being called a she devil.
Yeah.
My work was called a pair of turds. And this was the Burger King logo and the Star Wars identity for Attack of the Clones.
Yeah.
Um, so I felt like I had to, if nothing more, defend the firm.
Yeah.
But I did go in very disingenuously. I pretended it didn't really matter to me, and it
Right.
really did. But I also didn't want to be the hysterical female. I didn't want to be, you know, seem overly emotional, taking it too personally. You know, now I don't know what I would have done differently, but I know I would have done something differently about that. I wouldn't have
Yeah.
been so like, you know, like this matters. In fact, it
Yeah.
mattered more than anything at that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like you said, the great thing about that experience is that it did lead to some incredible things in your life, because you then started sort of writing for that blog that had written those things
No,
about
and
you.
I'm now the godmother to Armin's oldest child. So,
Amazing.
there's, who would have thought, who would have
Yeah.
thought? Life is a really circuitous one.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, I think, the beauty in it as well.
Yeah. And yeah, so you started writing for that blog and then joined that team. You wrote your first book, and then you founded the graduate program in branding at the School of Visual Arts. So I want to hear a little bit about kind of that transition from, I guess, doing the design, which you still do and have been doing, but then to starting to teach
Mhm.
kind of branding and design. Was it kind of doing that writing and sharing your expertise in that way that sort of led you into teaching, or what kind of
Well,
influenced that transition?
I think I always wanted to be a teacher. When I was a little girl, I would
Yeah.
force my brother to be my student. So serious about it. My parents got me a attendance ledger so that I could
Amazing.
create all the names of all the students and then call the roll. And this was something that I spent a lot of time doing. I was so dedicated to this that my brother ended up skipping kindergarten because he knew everything he needed to know. He'd already started to read, he already started to write, and he went straight into first grade because of how much I was teaching him, which to this day is one of my great prides, that
Yeah.
I was able to do that. I mean, I don't know how he did that, but I'm proud of it.
Yeah. You can claim it.
So I always wanted to teach. I always felt like that was something that I wanted to do. I was teaching adjunct back in the 90s at
Yeah.
FIT, Fashion and Technology, and then I started teaching adjunct at the School of Visual Arts in 2006. And then Steve Heller approached me in 2007 about starting the Masters in Branding program, which a program like that had never existed before. So I was very excited about being able to create something from nothing and create the kind of program I wish that I could have had while I was coming up the ranks. And so it's a program that is focused on the various disciplines that really comprise branding. Branding is a combination of a whole slew of other disciplines: cultural anthropology, behavioral psychology, economics, business strategy, design. And so these are the tenets and the threads that we teach in the program. It's now 11 years old. We've
Yeah.
graduated 250 people, and so many of them are making such a big imprint on the field, and I'm so proud of our students. We still have quite a lot of the founding faculty, but are always growing and looking for new ways to incorporate thinking into the program. And it's been a big challenge over the last year as we transitioned to from an in-person, on-site, intensive 10 and a half month program to one that's now more global and online. But it's been, and again, I went into that kicking and screaming, thinking there's no way, and like stop teaching and projectile crying, trying to master Zoom and
Oh
Canvas
yeah.
and Slack. But now I'm really excited about it because I feel that teaching online in a lot of ways democratizes the process. You don't
Yeah.
have that hierarchy of where students sit in the front and the back and the sides, what those that are hiding, that you can see everybody all at the same time, as long as you have, that Zoom uh, that Zoom screen set
Yeah.
to 49 people. And we only have 22 people in the class, so it's great. And it changes the dynamics in, I think, a really positive way. And there are drawbacks in not being able to see people and physically engage with them face to face, but there's still a great opportunity in lots of other ways. So much so that we're going to be launching a hybrid program so that we can offer the opportunity to people that aren't able to come to the United States or can't afford to live in New York, to be able to still take the program and be part of it in a really meaningful way. It's been a really interesting time to rethink modalities of education and pedagogy.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, I know that like I've looked at your program, and I've looked at other, there's like a master's in typography I looked at once, and they're all in the US, and I was like, that's never gonna happen. I can't do that. So it's incredible that these new ways of teaching and learning are coming to make it more accessible for anybody, kind of wherever you are or whatever your circumstances are. It can become a little bit more, approachable and accessible for everybody, which is amazing, I think. And you and your students have literally written the Bible on branding, which I think is, I love that title. I think it's amazing. And that is one of 6 books that you have published, soon to be 7,
Yes.
which I love that that's kind of full circle from your English degree, that you kind of did English and now you're still doing the writing. But so do you want to tell me a little bit about your new book that's coming up?
Absolutely. I would love to. I'm very excited about it. So the book is called Why Design Matters: Conversations with the World's Most Creative People. And it is an anthology of some of my very best interviews that I've conducted on Design Matters over the past 16 years.
Wow.
And it is a coffee table book. It's 10 by 10. It'll be about 350 pages. So it's got, it's a big plunky book.
Yeah.
It features beautiful photography that I've sourced from all over the world. One of the other things that happened with COVID was being unable to conduct photo shoots, whereas originally I was going to have 3 photo shoots in 3 cities and be able to take original photographs of my interviewees over the years, bring them all together and take photos, and that wasn't able to happen. So I ended up sourcing them. I became my own photo editor. But now, I mean, I really was able to source some of the most magnificent photos ever taken of the people that are included in the book. So it includes about 60 interviews. It's organized into 5 areas: legends, culture makers, so forth. I'm really pleased with it. Roxanne Gay, my wife, wrote the introduction, and I have essays by people like Tim Ferriss and Maria Popova and Steve Heller and Zach Pettit, people that are really important in my life, and to the show. It'll be out October 26th. Hopefully I'll be able to do some online or potentially in-person events around the book. And yeah, it's a book that really represents a lot of my life's work. So I'm very excited about it.
How incredible. I mean, I think having all of those interviews together in one kind of valuable piece is going to be amazing. And I read that you had also been filming a documentary. Is that right as well?
Well,
Yeah.
pre-COVID. Adobe was working with me on a documentary to really show the journey of the book.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that couldn't be continued
Oh,
because I didn't do any photo shoots and I didn't
yeah.
have any in-person meetings with the designer and my editor and so forth. So that didn't happen. Maybe I'll do a little promo of the book or something like that, because that would be a fun thing to do. Actually, I think I'll approach Adobe and ask them if they'll be willing to do that instead.
Yeah. I think it would be amazing to see some of that, because I'm sure, so many creatives love to see other creatives process.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's kind of a cool experience to share that process too, of kind of writing a book and bringing it all together. So hopefully you're still able to do something. That would be
Yeah,
amazing.
definitely. But I'm really happy with the cover and really happy with the design. I've been working with Alex Kalman. Alex is Tibor and Myra Kalman's son. So there's a wonderful, again, another sort of wonderful sense of this sort of circuitous nature of life. And Tibor Kalman was somebody that was so impactful to how I think about design, to how I think about a career and the meaning of design. And then Myra Kelman, of course, is one of the great illustrators and artists of our time, and somebody whose work I've been collecting for decades. So to be working with Alex, who's a great designer in his own right, is something that feels kind of miraculous.
Yeah, that's incredible. And does it feature any of your own kind of illustrative work or your own?
Nope.
No, not this
No,
one.
I didn't want to. The only thing that is mine from a visual standpoint is the cover, which includes a scribble, a giant scribble, which represents the sort of circuitous nature of a conversation and a life and an idea, any journey. It's one of my favorite things, and we were able to get HarperCollins to approve that. So very excited about it.
I love to ask this question to everybody, and I'm excited to hear obviously your perspective. But having obviously been through the process yourself of branding your own personal brand and working with so many brands around the world like Burger King and all of those amazing brands, what one piece of advice, if you can narrow it down to one, would you give to creatives when it comes to branding their passion?
Well, I think that the term personal brand is a bit of an oxymoron. Brands are manufactured. They're manufactured entities that people conjure and create with their imagination, with their ability to be innovative. They're not really real in the truest sense of the word real. Brands don't have a consciousness. They don't breathe air. They don't have living, beating hearts. They don't bleed. They don't cry. They don't have souls or feel pain or pleasure. Brands very well may be the promise of an experience, but brands don't ever get to experience or reflect on that experience. So there's really nothing personal about brands other than the choice an actual person makes to accept or reject one in their life. People can own brands and they can create brands and they can direct brands, but I don't think that they should aspire to be brands. I think that what is more important is to think about your character and your reputation and the work that you make. And thinking about that in that way, for me, feels much more personal than trying to create an impersonal brand. Yeah,
that's a really great way to think about that, I think. And there is sort of that pressure or expectation to make a personal brand. So I like that way of looking at it as more of your character and your value and what's important to you and those sorts of things. So I love that. Thank you very much for sharing that incredible wisdom and expertise and for sharing your story with me. It's incredible to hear anybody's creative story and to hear their journey. So I'm very thankful and grateful. And I would love for you to be able to tell the people where they can find you and what you would love for them to check out from you if you would like.
Thank you, Holly. Well, you can find me on my website, debbiemillman.com, or on Instagram or Twitter at Debbie Millman. Super easy.
Amazing. And we will all look out for Why Design Matters in October. I'm very, very excited.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Holly. Thanks for the great questions and the great conversation.
Anytime. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks. It's so good to see you again. This was so much fun.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Brand Your Passion and choosing to spend some time with me learning about branding, business, and all things creativity. You can find more episodes just like this one at blackandwhitestudios.nz/brandyourpassion. If you liked this one, you can tap that subscribe button so that you're notified about every new episode. And if you've got a spare second, I would love it if you could leave a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. I would love to hear from you and hear about how you're enjoying the podcast. If there were some helpful goodies in this episode for you, it would mean the world to me if you could screenshot your podcast player on your phone right now, hop over to Instagram or Twitter and tag me at Black and White Studios. That's at BLCKWHT Studios. By subscribing and reviewing and sharing, you're helping me to reach more creators just like you so that together we can make the world a more creative place, one brand at a time. I really can't achieve this mission without you, so your support means the world. I'll talk to you in the next episode, but until then, keep creating.